I thought I'd give a little background there. So in thinking about the focus of this being on an educational experience that we are creating for students here, then I thought I'd talk about my own personal experience in the education realm. So in my personal experience with community psych education from a Research One institution, I found that I was frustrated by the limits and expectations of that setting in many ways. I ultimately needed to leave the group of community psychology and move into community engaged research spaces on campus in order to do the work that I felt was right for me and that felt right to be doing as a developing representative of the field of community psychology. So I wanted to do work that was meaningful for communities, that contributed more to transformative processes, and that was also a contribution to the literature. And then I became passionate about making this type of educational experience more available within the field. So I came to NLU to assist in the development of a program that would attempt to challenge the norms of more traditional research and ways of academia. So while I am positioned as an academic by way of my job role in an academic institution, I do view myself as more of a practitioner scholar grounded in community psychology ethics, where most of my work involves evaluation, community consultation, use of multiple qualitative and quantitative methods, being an agitator within academic and other spaces I occupy, and increasingly learning how to connect such work with more political spaces within this urban context. So that leads me to want to tell you a little bit more just about the program, just because I know there's some newer faces here. I just want to give some basics so you get the idea. So I think NLU is kind of a unique space to begin with. It's an education-focused institution, even though we're increasingly building more of a research standpoint. But our program, it started about 11 years ago, and it's housed in a transdisciplinary sciences college, and we are within the urban setting of Chicago. And just to give a sense of our students, all of our students come from a master's level education from somewhere. It could be from any discipline, from arts, social work, community development, anything. It could be anything, business. So we get a wide, diverse set of knowledge from that angle, but they also bring a lot of practical real world experience, because many of them are returning back to school after several years of working in the field. A high number of our students are from a variety of minority groups. I think it's about like 85% Black and like 5% Latino. So it's very diverse. And approximately 90% plan to stay in the Chicagoland area upon graduation. So there is this sort of connection to community that is automatic from day one, and this wanting to give back right away. So, our commitment is to building up historically underrepresented populations, given just who our students are, right? So our goal is to support students at all levels, emotionally, socially, culturally, their professional development. We really do try to build a very authentic relationship with students, seeing them as community partners that will go on forever, in a sense, right? So that is the basis for much of the work we do together. But our faculty structure, we do function as a team, which I think is a unique way to be working together. We develop committees and work as a team and bring on multiple types of expertise where needed. And it really is a bit of a partnership in a project. And we're very much collaborative and co-learning oriented, where much of our program is informed by ongoing student engagement and tweaking things all the time, adding new information. Our pedagogical approach, I'd say, is focused more on community psych methods and values more than any particular content expertise. We work to create mutually cooperative community-based research projects. And just to give you a sense of how the variety of this is, we've got criminal justice, education, healthcare, homelessness, immigration, LGBTQ issues, mental health, military service, nonprofit development, economic development, intervention and prevention, you name it. We've had so many different ideas. And I think this is just because the students bring the passion for the work and we figure out how to make it happen. And so we learn a lot along the way. And because this is a practice call, I thought it appropriate just to mention a little bit of what we're covering in terms of core competencies in the curriculum of the program. So just to give you a sense, we definitely have community psych principles, values, history, and theory. We have some courses focused on different aspects of group processes, some on collaboration, consultation, capacity building, measurement and assessment, advocacy, community organizing, research design, data collection analysis, professional development, cross-cultural communication, report writing, and reflexivity through being a participant conceptualizer every step of the way. So I know this is one idea I try to hammer with them. Your role is to be participating and thinking and writing and conceptualizing and participating, and there's this praxis associated with this. So where do our students land? I thought just giving you a sense of where they go. In general, we are teaching them how to be agitators within many settings. And I'd say a high percentage, when we look at our numbers over the last 11 years, have gone into some form of higher education, which is kind of unexpected, but I'd say a lot of that is adjunct teaching as well. Consulting, we do have a practicum component that is about them learning to be consultants as they exit the program. So consulting is a big component. Nonprofit and community development is another big area, health services, and a lot of folks go into evaluation. Did Erica come on?
Yeah. I'm here.
Hey.
Hello.
So I was just talking a little bit about the program, but it might be good for you to tell a little bit about your positionality here and yeah.
So hi, I don't know how much of my introduction was messed up. I'm actually here in a really amazing facility here in Chicago. It's a really amazing radio station, community, owned and run radio station with lots of. So this is really actually the perfect place to be describing kind of what happens at National Louis. A lot of our students are working out in communities in some of the most interesting and amazing ways conceivable, from running block clubs to running parades in Inglewood, and using all of those as ways to build community and bring folks together before they even get into the program. And then when they get into the program, they're able to really conceptualize and understand ways to even take that work further through the lens of what we're offering in terms of our just understandings of the community psychology practice and our approach to things from kind of this participatory method that Tiffany talked about. And so I myself am a product of the program. I graduated in 2016. I started the program in 2012, and it was absolutely, for me, eye-opening to see the ways in which it differed from other programs, just in that there was so much openness and there was so much flexibility and there was so much respect for the knowledge that we brought to the table as students. Because again, all of us came from various backgrounds. I was a high school teacher of 16 years. And I brought a lot of firsthand information and knowledge about education, but what the program allowed me to do was really exercise that knowledge and expand it a little bit more through the lens of inquiry and just thinking about the ways that I could learn more about that which I thought I already knew. Like you come to the table thinking, I know everything there is to know about education. I was a teacher of 16 years. What can anyone tell me? And then learning through this scientific process that there's so much more, but then also knowing, coming around the bend and looking at it from a kind of a participatory kind of communal approach, is that you still belong in the community that you're studying and learning from at the same time that you are applying a scientific approach to it. And so for those reasons, I think our program is unique and exciting and really, really an important approach to the students themselves, like not discounting in any way and celebrating and uplifting what they come to the table with, as opposed to them kind of putting a pause on that and shifting it a bit so that they can then learn this thing apart from who they are as a person and then go back to who they are as a person. I think it's best to kind of mix it all in together and make sure that no one has to give up any pieces of themselves, but that they bring all of the pieces of themselves into this work, and that it benefits not just themselves and their own knowing, but the communities that they serve. And ultimately, and this is the part I think that we leave out, it ultimately benefits academia, our knowing, and expands all of our perspectives as well. So for those reasons, I think our program is the bee's knees, and I'm happy to say more if we decide to.
So just on that note, I think it might be helpful to talk a little bit about what we had written in our little description of, teaching practice within a research degree. And, you know, I've been doing a lot more reading on philosophy of science and just really thinking about what exactly are we trying to do in this program. Just we reflect all the time on this and how do we need to change things more and more every year. But it's interesting, the history of research we know has privileged and prioritized only certain ways of seeing knowledge and certain types of data as valid forms of evidence. And so this view research limits what we can learn. And with qualitative methods, community-based research, it's more legitimate and we can think more broadly about how we can educate for this more diverse ways of knowing. But we know it needs to be ecologically valid. We know our values, positions, and biases influence every aspect. And in practice, we know that contextual is key and that certain methods, questions, and data are useful for different contexts and purposes. So I think one question we're always seeking to answer is how can we expand our thinking about research in ways that allows for a more nuanced understanding of our world and how to retain a critical approach for purposes of social justice. So, I think one thing I've been a part of over the years is this binary of research versus practice. And this conceptualization of the field is really not serving the purpose that we need it to. And if we view this more as a continuum, and I know I've talked about this with some of you before, a philosophy of science that is a little bit more malleable, that allows for flexible application depending on the context, we can understand more about the stable aspects of community structures as well as subjective experience while maintaining a critical lens, especially regarding our local and global history as being of settler colonialism and how that was designed to disenfranchise certain groups. And so I think these kinds of frames are the things that we bring to every class setting, to every conversation with our students. And I think we are increasingly taking more of a decolonial lens as well, and that it's important to see outside of psychology. It's outside of the disciplines, which has really confined us to some extent. And so, I think one way we could do more is hold this necessary critical stance, connect the learnings across what we can know to be true about community structures, as well as the accumulative subjective effects, but looking across contextually situated research knowledge and addressing structural problems with that cumulative knowledge. And so that in our communities, we can address healing in terms of justice. And there's a strong emphasis on justice, I think, in our program, particularly for who we are working with. So I just wanted to make sure that I talked a little bit about the science piece there, but Erica, if you want to say any more about that too.
I mean, I really do think that the justice piece runs pretty deep through our program, because did you share, Tiffany, any of the demographics of our program?
Yeah, a little bit.
So in that, we have students who are embedded in and live in and come from communities that have been marginalized and disenfranchised. It's very useful to be able to use that as opposed to, again, trying to push it to the side. And so when we come to the table with these and we're including these voices into the community psychology kind of frame of understanding, then it's important to situate, well, what comes next when you're finished? I know we talked about them maybe going into academia and other places, but I think that our students in particular have had an impact on what it looks like to be a community psychologist actually working respectfully inside of a community, because it's very tempting to take a kind of lofty approach to working with communities from a position of security, and even security that is gained from the work that we're doing in the communities, and that we might get grants or we might get funding or money to come and act on behalf of a population, as opposed to truly going in and looking at how we might be able to serve the population and do so equitably with whatever funds might be coming in from whatever sources. And I think that that's a string that's been being pulled lately, and it's one example of the ways that our unique student population is impacting the way that we practice, because they are wanting desperately to hold accountable the field and say, well, hold on, I know that this is what community psychology is, but is that what it always has to be? And as we look at what it can be in the future, as we begin to include more voices and say, okay, are we looking to maintain the status quo and just give it a little bit of color? Or are we looking to really rearrange things for true justice and equity? And I believe that there are kind of two schools of thought on that. And our students are really pushing the dialogue to real justice and equity. And they're doing so just through their own research and understandings and hailing from the communities that are being served, And I think there's a big and very important difference there that could inform all of us in the way that we engage, because it does sometimes come across when, again, there are resources being given from the government or corporations or any kind of initiative to our projects, and we secure our livelihoods and our homes and our careers through this work with them while they remain economically unstable, and yet we get to be good. And that's conversations that I've had with students time and again, like, what is this role going to look like? Because I don't want to be that. I want to serve, I want to be an honest partner, and I want to understand that my future is tied to theirs, not that I'm doing something benevolent for them that I can operate on top of, because I've elevated outside of the struggles that community might be having through my education or other means. And so I think that that's just maybe one of the more recent, and thus the one that I'm bringing out, but honestly, it's a sterling example of the ways that the openness of the department, the ways that we've encouraged students to continue to dig and find their voice and understand who and what they want to be, and not placing limitations in terms of what this is supposed to look like, but really using their knowledge that they come through the door with and figuring out what can this be. I think that their participation in conferences and other measures, and they just did a talk at ECO, I think that it has really, really benefited not just them and their work, but again, the entire field in some important ways. And I think without the openness of the program, the collective models that we employ, I just don't think that kind of thought process would be possible.
I think one other way we're encouraging the identities they bring in is by also encouraging them to bring literature from the communities that they are from. So if somebody's doing a study on Black maternal activism, are we building on the literature of Black scholars?
That's right.
And though this may not be traditional within psychology, there's a whole body of literature that is talking about the challenges of being a civic participant in society from that world.
Absolutely. And I think that the voices of Black scholars, but honestly, other scholars of color and queer scholars and the like, are oftentimes left out. And it didn't really hit me while I was studying, because I was so entranced with what I was learning, and I had such a wealth, stockpile of kind of Black psychological literature. But the program has really grown in terms of bringing that on board and embracing those voices. And Dr. Olson, who'll hopefully be joining us later, Brad, quoted Amos Wilson at the end of his speech at SCRA. And Dr. Amos Wilson, of course, is one of the eminent Black scholars and psychologists. And so just growing and learning and bringing those voices in, and not in any way trying to hold on to any kind of psychological canon, is a really important part of the growth of the program and hopefully the field. And I just think the more that we do that, the more that everyone benefits and can interrogate their understandings and move them forward as we expose ourselves to a great deal more in terms of thought, because we all lose out when we eliminate those voices, not just the Black students.
And we haven't figured it all out. So I want to definitely tell you there are some challenges that we have here. One is definitely faculty worldviews. Not all of us agree on how all of this should go down. So that is one thing we're always grappling with. The extent to which we can take a critical stance, sometimes that's off-putting and depends on the context. Another is transferring research knowledge to applied projects, and vice versa, transferring our learned knowledge from our projects back to the literature. I think one thing we want to do more of is make our final papers and dissertations more aligned with the journals in our field and other associated content areas that they're writing about, so that they can make meaningful contributions to the existing literature. But I'd say those are our main challenges at the moment. So if you guys have any answers, we're open.
How about if they have questions?
Or questions.
Are you two ready for us to turn to questions? Great. People have thoughts, questions. Certainly this has been a very provocative and interesting discussion. And I've always been fascinated by the National Lewis program, because you take practitioners in large numbers. I mean, that's not, there are people who are actually practicing, and then they come out and they're all in one city or mainly. So it's pretty interesting in terms of the impact a program like this can have. And I thought the two of you gave a great description What kind of questions come up for people as you listen to this?
Have you thought about ways you could disseminate that program so that it's available other than Chicago? I think that's the frustrating part, is there's such a need for programs like that in so many communities, but how do you even begin to disseminate that?
Do you want me to answer?
Go ahead.
Anybody can figure that.
I think that, and we've been, I don't know, is it fair to say thinking about a model, Tiffany, for online? So we've been thinking about a model for expanding this at least nationally to begin with online, kind of a hybrid, where students would come to National Louis 4 times a year, once per kind of one of our 4 terms for a weekend, and then they would do their work synchronously online. In the interim, we've been talking about it for some time, and I think that the more we mention it and the more we workshop it and think it through with others, we're getting closer and closer to it being a reality, hopefully in the next coming few years, if not sooner. And so it's a desire, and it's something that's on the talking table. And because we have encountered at other SCRAWs and other conferences and just conversations with folk, or even just the psychologists and the counseling folks that come through our masters that may move out of town that desperately want to be a part of the community psychology family, but geography prohibits them from doing so. And we just don't want that to be a barrier for anyone. And also we do selfishly want to pull from other regions and learn what's happening in those areas and expand our knowing and make sure that our practice is and that this model can be replicated and can work in a number of different communities that are in need. And again, the most important part is taking advantage of the knowledge and wealth that people have in their own communities. For example, Brad and I worked on, I have an organic garden here in Chicago, a kind of big community garden, and Brad and I worked to look through, and it was actually a affinity program with Tiffany as well. We worked to look at urban gardens across the country and what they needed, from Oakland, Brooklyn, and Harlem, all the way to Chicago and Ferguson, Missouri. And so in doing so, we encountered so many people who are community psychologists and who are capable of bringing this kind of galvanizing, organizing, understanding of massive, macro and micro, phenomena. And if they were able to funnel that through and gain the understandings and the wisdom of this field, I just think they'd be unstoppable. And so that was one of the early impetus. Of course, our university and the program had been talking about trying to find a way to serve more people for a very long time now. But for me, that was when I really thought about this being almost a necessity. Not that they don't have amazing programs in their locales, but certainly making this one of those choices.
I love that. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We're in a sort of an academic community psychology desert down here in Texas. There are no programs here. And the closest anyone can come is a public health degree at UT Arlington.
See, we want those folk. So all of those community psychologists down there. And then Chicago's pretty central, it's not like if you're in California, you'd have to haul all the way to New York or vice versa. We're kind of dead in the middle, and so it's a great city. So we're hopeful that if we're able to, make a model like this, the faculty is able to come and put something together. But it's hard to set aside time at the table for this because they're so involved. And I can speak to Tiffany personally because she was my thesis chair. So all the times that I called her to Starbucks to talk with me off a ledge, I'm sure she's doing that with however many of her current advisees right now. And so to say, also, by the way, put together this second program is a little tough, but I think it'll get done.
Have you looked at the Have you looked at the program at Pacifica?
Yeah.
How they're set up?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's an interesting model as well. And
Yeah,
I love the
Really
phrase,
good model.
Erica, that you use, which is, and then these were community psychologists.
Yeah.
Because they're undergreed community psychologists, but it's a great way to describe the folks that are out there.
Yep.
I guess my question would be, one of the first things that Tiffany said was that many of the students go into academic positions. And it would seem to me you're training people. I'd always assumed that people might go back to the agencies they came from or the part of the community they came from, but it sounds like they go from being practitioners almost into being academics. Am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, no, I think mostly it's adjuncting. So they have one foot in
Got it.
teaching and one. What I've seen is that they start becoming agitators in the settings that they work in. And then some of them just decide they can't be in that space anymore. Like they've outgrown it, or they notice that they can't make the change they want in that space, and then they seek out other spaces to do that. And that's why many go into, cobbling a career together that includes some form of evaluation, teaching some classes, consulting, kind of living within the cracks of the society more so.
I
But
think that's
some
spot
do.
on.
Some do
That's spot
stay
on, Tiffany.
or
That's
move
just,
up.
yeah.
I think so. I kind of have a comment and a question that are on two different kind of tracks. So my question is, what would you say is the general consciousness of the kind of greater Chicago community about community psychology, about National Lewis? And so I'll ask that question first, but then I had kind of a follow-up to that.
I think that folks know about us, not nearly as much as I'd like to, but fortunately, our students have pretty big mouths. They're out doing the work. For example, LaShawn Latrice is a very, very active activist in Chicagoland, from anything from the Laquan McDonald tragedy to issues with the way that the police are handling the Jussie Smollett case, and just general issues of criminal justice system injustices. And she's very well known in the city, and she makes it clear where she came from and that everyone else should come here too. So that seems to be the kind of what happens with our students when they leave. They tend to share it out a lot. But in terms of the general consciousness about community psychology as a whole, I would say that outside of folks that are kind of in that space already is very small. I think that I came from high school and I taught psychology at the high school level, and there's nothing there about community psychology. People don't know what it is. And when I say community psychology, I believe that they just still imagine that I've got someone laying on a couch somewhere smoking a pipe. They don't imagine what this actually is. And so I think that is low in Chicago and everywhere else.
Okay. So the other piece, I think, is what you were saying, Tiffany, about how they kind of cobble together. Right? I love that phrasing. And so I've been following a lot of practitioners and scholars of color in public health, and there's a really big movement right now of kind of emphasizing the entrepreneurial spirit of a public health practitioner, and I know that's something that type of dialogue has been something that's been going on through, community psychology for a while, in terms of if you're doing consulting or what have you. But I do feel like there's definitely room for that. I know probably all of us maybe have the same kind of concerns about maybe in grad school, learning things like grant writing, or learning things like consulting, and, ways to market yourself, right, as a community psychologist. So I thought about that, and I thought about that juxtaposed to kind of what I'm seeing emerging in public health, with kind of creating your own space to still do that work and not be refined by kind of these restrictive environments or environments that aren't ready, or what have you. So that just kind of made me think of that.
Yeah,
I agree with everything you just said.
and I think we have a limitation in the financial area in our program. We definitely need more learning about the entrepreneurial way of being, and the finances associated with having to manage that kind of personal business. I guess when you get to the, like Susan's like, yes, exactly. That's what we're missing. I think it's just the history of our field. We've always stayed away from the money side of things,
Yeah.
right? But it's really necessary to survive, and we want them to survive, right? And we haven't figured that piece out, and we're kind of not wanting to touch it to some extent. But
Yeah.
And see,
You can, you
in my
know,
cohort,
I was going to suggest just sending them, like I had an MBA accounting class and some other things that I think really helped me. So I do all my own accounting and I do a lot of my own business stuff because I had started working on an MBA, but that was just for fun. But so you might want to steer them toward some of those kinds of classes or seminars in their community for small businesses.
But you also need to open up the dilemma of how does that mesh with issues of justice?
that's right.
And often we don't see how you can make a living and stick to your values.
That's
And I
right.
think that's an interesting, great issue for graduate students to talk about, but also to be given the skills
That's right.
and given the models. And Susan is an example of a model of where you can make a living as a consultant and stick to social justice values. And there are others, plenty of others are out there too.
And
Yeah.
I will touch on it in our program. We do have a consultation course that has historically been run by Judah Viola. Who recently has shifted over, but I think it might shift back. And Judah has just gave some very beautiful analysis about how to do that.
Right.
And he's what my understandings are. Like that class really helped me to frame that. He always said to us from day one, your job as a community psychologist is to work yourself out of a job. And so you're not meant to be there working on issues of obesity in a school for 20 years and nobody lost a pound. Like that's not what your goal is, so that you can continue to extract money from these communities in the name of helping them. And that's just not equitable. It's not just. And so if you haven't worked yourself out of a job in some measurable time frame, then you haven't really been just or even effective. And we keep allowing ourselves to pretend that we've been impactful when really we've been predatory. And I hate to put it in those phrases, but that's what it boils down to when we've got communities of color suffering while we thrive on their names and their backs. And so for those reasons, I think that the consulting class that we do have is a great first step. But Susan, I agree with you. There could be models where you can understand how you can actually earn a living through your own nonprofit or grant writing, or, grant writing is a very powerful position, helping to structure the ways that these programs actually work. Evaluation is an extraordinarily powerful position in terms of really understanding from an honest lens, how did this work? Who did it serve? What ultimately happened? And those are powerful positions that can create inherently equity depending on who's actually doing the work.
Yeah, and I think
But
too.
are there questions from other folks? Susan and I are doing a lot of it. Are there other people out there?
Yeah.
You seem to be leaning in. Oh, Jean, go ahead.
Yeah. I was wondering how many people had been following the recent discussion on the listserv that started out talking about a continuous improvement.
Stigma.
But then it went on to talking about nonprofits versus privates and values and how those play out in both. And I found it fascinating. And I also thought it was I believe it was David Chavez who was saying that we do not train community psychologists adequately in nonprofits, in how they work, in how their values are or are not displayed, and that we should have more training based about the whole how nonprofits work in the U.S. and around the world. And it just seemed to me that fit in with this conversation.
Oh, for sure. I teach the course on leadership and organizational change, and we read a handbook on nonprofit leadership and management, which includes everything about the history and tax structure of nonprofits to, evaluation, board structure, assessment, everything. So they learn everything about the way they're structured and have learned to question the value of a nonprofit within community settings. And I want them to do that. Is it the best move to create a new nonprofit? If that seems like the way to go, because you can apply for a nonprofit in like 5 minutes online, I think, somewhere. But we have taken that on quite a bit. I think the one piece that I've struggled the most with is the government. piece of things, like knowing, how to connect more with government structures and challenging those spaces more.
Can I add a different lens to Jean's question? I appreciate everything you've shared and share your challenges. I am curious, I don't know if you can share more about how you described the faculty worldviews differing within your program. But getting back to the nonprofit question and even the government question, I know National Louis has other programs outside of the community psych program that do nonprofit management, that do public policy, other things. And I'm curious if there's any cross-pollination of bringing your lens over there, so that, that's one of the things I'm interested in, is how can we bring our lens, our critical lens, our social justice lens to those other spaces where they're not coming from the perspective of we're here to work ourselves out of a job, or truly make transformative change. So I don't know if there's any comments you have about that.
Well, just on the college question, sort of across colleges and programs, I do think there is something to be said for the different levels of education. So most of the other programs in our college are master's level, and I do think a lot of our faculty hold more of a social justice lens to what they do, just naturally by who they are and how they teach their courses. But the master's level is more of sort of that applying theory to practice space, and I think they're doing more of that. And I think the outcomes that even the university is more interested in at that level is really making sure that people land in careers that they are hoping for once they graduate, that they're getting the content expertise and that they're getting plugged into the jobs that they want at the end, or moving up into leadership in those positions. And at the doctoral level is really where we're focusing on more transformational goals, and really how are we agitating and shifting the thinking about community spaces. And so I think there's some of that, but we're the only PhD program in the university, and there's only, I think, 2 other, there are EDDs, actually, maybe there's more EDDs on the College of Education side, but they're very few doctoral level and mostly in education. So we're doing little at this moment, but I'm also starting a research committee for our college, which I think would create more cross-pollination across those 2. So there's more to be done there. I don't know if Erica wants to say anything about worldviews or faculty worldviews, maybe.
I mean, that's always challenging because, not everybody, these are difficult topics, right? People are accustomed to things going one way, and then suddenly when it's the other way, it's not so comfortable. And so it feels fast sometimes, or it feels not quite right, when really it's just taking something that's very, I don't even like using words like outdated, because it was never dated. It was never good. It was never right to lock out certain voices and to maintain and hoard power, or to hoard ideas, or to try to take these like glacial steps towards community change while you're safe and the other people that are like suffering in some enormous and grotesque ways. Or it's like, oh, just hold on, you just be patient. Meanwhile, there's these big sweeping steps in every other part of society, but when it comes time for justice, it's like, hold tight, give it another 50, 60, 70, 100 years, and then we might get you to step 1. So when there is this dialogue around more aggressive methods for change, and really sweeping actions that have the capacity to truly change the way things are, there's a little bit of discomfort there. And for those reasons, I think just that shift, from what's familiar can be uncomfortable. And I don't think for a single second we have anybody in our program or even in the university. I mean, maybe I'm being glib to say no one, but I haven't identified anyone that I think is just outright against this kind of positive change. I just think that there's a lot of people who don't really understand how to facilitate it, and that nervousness might make them a little anxious and even defensive about the methods that they've had in place for so long. Because if I've been doing it this way for so long and suddenly maybe that's not the right way, then what does that say about my career? And what does that even say about me, when the lens shouldn't even be focused on you? It should be focused on the people that you're serving. And that's a tough sell. But I don't think it's because anybody's bad or ignorant or anything like that. I just think it's because it hasn't had to be processed yet. And getting that processing done is essential. But the beauty is that once it gets done, then it's exponential, because then it has the impact of everybody that they're teaching and that they're serving, and then it can move forward from there exponentially. The work is getting done and people seem open to it. So
I just want to add a thought there that, the point she just made about people are just kind of used to doing things a certain way, really, and it's comfortable, and it's like that's just how it's worked. I think that is probably the biggest challenge. I think one of the things I struggled with, because I was so young when I started working in this space, was, oh no, I'm not going to be perceived as an expert, right? But then I realized, wait, that's not really the task here. It's not about me being perceived as an expert. Like, who cares? Like, if I can work well with others and we can work together to reach the goals we're working towards together, then that's all that matters. And I think that's why we've started to shift the focus from being these content experts and having this hierarchical relationship with students to having a more egalitarian relationship and sharing knowledges and really appreciating the co-learning process together.
But so
You're
much of our
talking about
structure.
the changes that you see as students pushing for, and they're the basic values of community psychology. And so few programs actually do that. They're much more comfortable with the long-term views that we've always taken. So it's really refreshing to hear this, and it's interesting to think about how people translate that into jobs and what kind of implication that has in the community later on. You talked about doing a nonprofit course. A huge number of graduates in all community psychology programs go into practice, and if they go into the practice, they're going to work for nonprofits, and almost none of them have been taught anything about nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have, it's been sort of how to manage the finances, not what's essentially profoundly wrong with the way most nonprofits operate. So it's refreshing to see you kind of pushing that right in, because that's where realistically where the students are going.
Mm-hmm.
Other people who haven't had a chance to ask a question.
I have a question. This is Tatiana. So I also am looking for an applied position, and I've been getting training in evaluation and consultation and stuff like that. How can students from my program be connected to or updated with the procedures that you're putting in place at National Louis?
And your program is?
Michigan State Community Psychology.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm thinking the AEA is 2-3 weeks from now, and I know that I'm meeting with Adrienne, who I believe runs the master's online in evaluation at the program now, if she's still doing that. But so she always organizes us to get together AEA. And I think, Tatiana, I know who you are. You were just at ECO. So
Yes.
so I know you're not going to
Eco,
AEA.
what does she look like? Where's your camera? I don't know who I'm talking to.
But yeah, that is one space where I run into all my old folks from Michigan State that went into evaluation work. But yeah, this kind of goes back to what Erica was saying. We want to find a way to be more connected, not just in Chicago, but connected in all the ways we want to be connected. I think another way we're thinking about being connected is just more globally as well, right? I'm connecting more with programs in other countries and really trying to figure out what we can learn about the same issues happening in other contexts, and how can we work more together to understand how these are same issues are happening in different geographic spaces. But yeah, so we could do more. We could actually have even regular Zoom calls around evaluation, and there could be lots of ideas thrown around to connect more on that specifically. We just haven't done it. But I'm happy to share anything individually, Tatiana, for sure.
I have a
Thank you.
comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You want to
So
introduce
my name is
yourself?
Stephen.
We missed you in the beginning.
Oh, my name is Stephen Vodantis. I'm from Pacifica. Graduate Institute. Well, I mean, that's where I studied 3 years. I have an MA in community psychology. Tiffany, Judah, and Brad all came out and taught classes for our cohort. And they were great classes. So I just have a comment to make here that I think is relevant. I was just watching a trailer, a Brave New Films trailer. That's Robert Greenwald's company, and he's created a film called Youth in Action, and it's about the multiracial group Teens Take Charge in New York City. And it's all about how after 65 years after Brown versus the Board of Education, the school district in New York is as segregated as ever. And I'm just wondering, how does that happen? And then I think, well, you know, if they had a community psychologist on board, at least one or two, I don't think they would be in this situation right now. It looks like it's a great film to judge from the trailer. They're interviewing some of the students, and you know, the students notice how segregated the district is, and they're like, this is really crazy. And the adults are telling us, why don't you just stand down and let the adults handle it? And the student and the high school students are saying, well, we would love to do that, but you know, nothing has changed. I mean, look, you know, after 65 years after Brown versus Board of Education, New York is as segregated as ever. So, you know, and now I have an MA. I finished my coursework for a PhD, but I had to take time off because the paywall is so steep that I'm in a situation now where I have to get some income, establish a income flow before I can go back and do my dissertation research. And I'm hoping I'll get, you know, I'll be able to go back and do that. But in the meantime, I am trying to find a job. And Erica said that, you know, no one knows what a community psychologist is. And I'm thinking it should be one of the professions that it's very easy to go out there and get a job. And that's why I told the story about the situation in New York City. I mean, it's absolutely appalling how that they're in this mess. And so there's just so many organizations out there that I think would benefit from a community psychologist, or, you know, even a small team of community psychologists, or just one, to let people know that the solutions to so many problems are social and community based. They aren't individual. So, I mean, that's my comment. That's kind of how I'm plugging into this dialogue right now. So maybe, you know, going forward, it's something that the profession can think of is how we can advocate for ourselves in the real world. Tiffany was talking about the divide between theory and practice within the field, and then when you expand that out into the world at large, it becomes a divide between the real world and academics, where, you know, from the point of view of the real world, all of academia is just theory, and you know, you just tuck it away in a closet somewhere and forget about it most of the time. But as this multiracial coalition in New York is showing us, community psychology is very important.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. An interesting observation about, you know, that there are no specific jobs named for community psychologists. And that's certainly, I think David Chavez and Kian Lee in Washington advertise for community psychologists. With all the graduates coming out of your program, some of them running agencies, did they start to advertise for community psychologists? They start to look for them? And because the question is, how do you get the market to change?
Are the people from our programs advertising for community psychologists?
I mean, they go back and I imagine some of them run agencies and run organizations. And
I think I'm thinking of a couple people that have emailed us. They send emails to us directly. Hey, we're looking for someone. It'd be great if you had any students or alumni that we can. So it's more individual level. I don't know if they're actually advertising more broadly for that title.
Right.
I think our students, when they have a position, and I can think of several right off the bat in my head right now, who, when they have a position, they go directly to someone in their cohort or a previous cohort and say, I want you for this thing, because not only do they spend a great deal of time with the students in their cohort, but there's opportunities through the various conferences and gatherings and speaking engagements on campus where they cross-pollinate cohorts over the years. So we're on cohort 15 now. And we've still got people from cohort 1 that are very, very active at almost every event. And so when those folks need someone, like Tiffany said, they'll either email us and say, hey, I need someone, who do you think? It's more personal, plugging into this direct community of community psychologists than it is necessarily looking more broadly in the city for some.
Right. But they have a network that they can tap into
Exactly.
with skilled people who share values. That's spectacular.
That's
Absolutely.
a big piece of this, is to develop the network. I've actually done a lot of work on really keeping track and keeping in touch with all of our alumni, and we just got some funding this year for the Department of Ed gave us some funding for this, but we're going to be doing more intentional networking events and really linking people so they can learn about each other's work and learn about what they want to be doing and really know who's out there and how to connect each other, build a movement more.
Over the years, as the Practice Council tried to identify where are the people who we would like to recruit, the ones who've gotten PhDs in any program, most programs don't track their graduates, and they're not encouraged to. And it's very interesting. So they'll track where their academic students go because that's prestige. He published a book, but they let the practitioners disappear. And we've lost track of many, many. So it's wonderful to hear that you're tracking them. We're coming to the end. I don't know if anybody has a closing question. I want to share great gratitude to both of you. This was more than I'd hoped for, because I think it really raises the questions of how do we train people in practice? What kind of challenges does that have? How to be relevant to people who are going into practice? And I don't know how many programs we could really have that conversation with. So we'll look around to see if there are others that we can do that with, but that's great. Any other closing comments?
Thank you for having us, Tom.
Oh,
This was good.
Thank you.
For us to get this together for you.
yeah, no.
Thank you
great.
very much for the opportunity to share.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you. And if anybody has an idea, I know that Kyra's going to hunt someone down for the November 15th meeting. Let me know. I'll be looking too. Otherwise, we have a December 6th with Christine Robinson. Is that right? Yes, December 6th with Christine Robinson, and I'll send you material on her. She's a really impressive practitioner and been around for a long time, who sort of fell into our lap, I guess, at the last Chicago biennial. And so some people said, oh, you got to contact them. So great. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jean, for recording it. This will be available on the website under practice. And we'll see you hopefully in a month, if not December 6th. And again, great thanks to Erica and Tiffany. Beautiful job.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone.
Good to see you, Stephen.
Have a great weekend.
Kyra, Megan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.